What happens when a wildlife conservationist who has dedicated his entire life to protecting endangered species sits down with a talk show host known for her sharp tongue and controversial opinions? What you're about to witness is one of the most explosive clashes in daytime television history. Robert Irwin, the son of the legendary Steve Irwin, walked onto The View expecting a friendly conversation about conservation. Instead, he found himself in a confrontation that left the audience stunned, the co-hosts scrambling, and social media on fire. Before diving into this unbelievable moment, imagine the buzz online as viewers immediately chose sides. Because what unfolded sparked powerful reactions from everyone watching. Asterisk. Robert took his seat on the iconic View couch with a warm smile, clearly ready to discuss his latest project, a massive conservation initiative aimed at protecting crocodile habitats in northern Australia. The conversation began pleasantly. The other co-hosts nodded along, asking supportive questions about wildlife protection, the Irwin family legacy, and the challenges of conservation work. Everything seemed calm and respectful, until Joy leaned forward with that unmistakable look and shifted the tone completely. Asterisk, she questioned him directly, suggesting that his family's conservation work might be performative, pointing out that the Irwins had made millions by putting animals on television. The studio fell instantly silent. Robert's smile faded, but he kept his composure, responding respectfully that his family had never exploited animals for profit, and that every dollar earned had gone back into conservation. He explained how their work had protected thousands of acres of land and saved countless species from extinction. Asterisk's Joy waved off his explanation, pressing harder. She argued that regardless of intent, they were still making money from animals, branding themselves, selling merchandise, and securing television deals. She challenged Robert to explain how that was any different from a circus. The tension in the room became palpable. The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly aware this discussion was spiraling. Robert leaned forward, his voice steady but firmer now, drawing a clear distinction between exploitation and education. He explained that circuses cage animals for entertainment, while his family rehabilitates injured wildlife, educates millions, and actively fights habitat destruction and poaching. If that difference wasn't clear, he said, then she hadn't truly looked into their work. Asterisk's Joy laughed, but there was nothing friendly about it. She dismissed his explanation and claimed she had seen the shows and the photo ops, cute animals and polished moments, but questioned where the real impact was. Then she crossed a line, accusing Robert of building his career solely on his father's name. The audience gasped. One of the co-hosts attempted to defend Robert, pointing out his independent achievements, but Joy talked over her, insisting she wanted Robert's answers. She demanded to know what he had personally accomplished without a camera crew present. Asterisk, Robert's face flushed not with embarrassment, but with barely contained frustration. He listed his achievements without hesitation, working with governments to help pass legislation protecting endangered species, funding anti-poaching units in Africa, and risking his life repeatedly in the field. He explained that media wasn't vanity, was a tool used to educate the public, change minds, and raise the massive funds required to make real conservation work possible. Asterisk. Joy smirked and reduced his explanation to money. Robert immediately pushed back, explaining the real costs of conservation: buying land, hiring rangers, building facilities, rescuing animals from illegal wildlife trade. This work costs millions, he said, and it cannot survive on small donations alone. Building a trusted brand was essential to sustaining meaningful impact. Asterisk Joy leaned back, clearly enjoying his frustration, and then shifted to another accusation. She claimed that constantly handling animals for television stressed them and prioritized content over their well-being. This was the moment Robert's calm demeanor finally cracked. His eyes flashed with genuine anger as he explained that every animal interaction followed strict ethical guidelines under the supervision of veterinarians, animal behaviorists, and wildlife experts. He stressed that they never put animals in harm's way and that the animals shown were either rescues, educational ambassadors accustomed to humans, or wildlife documented with minimal interference. Joy pressed again, insisting that they were still interfering by entering animal space. Robert fired back sharply, pointing out that without documentation, people like her wouldn't even know these species were disappearing. He argued that the real interference came from habitat destruction, climate change, and illegal poaching, the forces killing animals by the thousands every day. His family's mission, he said, was to show people what was at stake and give them a reason to care enough to act. Joy shook her head, calling conservation-based entertainment troubling and exploitative. At that point, Robert straightened in his seat, clearly done with being polite. He told her bluntly that what he found troubling was someone sitting comfortably in an air-conditioned studio, criticizing people who were actually risking their lives in the field. He suggested she had likely never spent a day in a wildlife reserve or witnessed firsthand what happens when a species goes extinct. The studio erupted. Applause mixed with gasps as the co-hosts tried desperately to regain control. Joy's expression shifted instantly from smug to stunned. She clearly hadn't expected Robert to push back so fiercely. Another co-host attempted to calm things down, urging everyone to reset the conversation, but Joy wasn't done. She sat up straighter, her voice sharp and defensive, insisting that she had advocated for many causes and that Robert had no right to suggest she hadn't done anything meaningful, and at that moment, the interview had fully transformed from a conversation into a televised confrontation. No one in the studio would soon forget. Robert doesn't back down an inch. He makes it clear he isn't denying that Joy has advocated for causes, but he insists she is attacking someone who has dedicated his entire life to conservation while doing so from a position of complete comfort. He tells her she has never had to pull a snake hook out of her bag at 3 a.m. to rescue a python from a flooded area. Never had to explain to a community why protecting a crocodile habitat matters more than developing it for profit. And never held a dying animal in her hands while knowing that if enough money isn't raised, dozens more will suffer the same fate. By now, the studio feels electric. People murmur, some nodding in agreement, others looking openly scandalized by the exchange. Joy tries to laugh it off, joking that not everyone can be a crocodile hunter. That word instantly changes Robert's tone. He snaps back that his father was not a hunter. He was a conservationist. The emotion in his voice is unmistakable. Using that term, he says, shows exactly how little she understands what Steve Irwin stood for and what he stands for now. Hunters kill for sport or trophies. His family has devoted their lives to keeping animals alive. The difference, he insists, is enormous. And the fact that she used that word tells him how seriously she has taken the conversation. The co-hosts exchange worried glances as one of them attempts to steer the discussion back on track by asking about a specific project. But Joy cuts her off. She insists on addressing the issue, accusing Robert of getting defensive because, in her view, there is some truth to her criticism. She states plainly that he benefits from animal content and that this is simply a fact. Robert lets out a short, bitter laugh and flips the argument back at her. If they're talking about benefiting from content, he says, she is a talk show host who makes a living from controversial opinions and stirring drama. Should people question whether her advocacy is genuine too, or whether she uses social issues to boost ratings? If her logic applies to him, he argues, it applies to her as well. The audience erupts cheers, mixing with boos as Joy's own face begins to flush. She insists it's completely different, but Robert immediately challenges her to explain how. She uses a platform to push messages, he says, and so does he. The difference is that his message is about preventing species from going extinct, while her message today seems focused on tearing down someone trying to do meaningful work. He asks her directly how that is different. Joy struggles to respond, eventually claiming she is simply holding him accountable, as journalists do. Robert responds bluntly that she is not a journalist, she is a commentator. And there is a clear difference between accountability and launching baseless attacks for the sake of good television. Asterisk. He goes on to explain that if she truly cared about accountability, she would have done the research. She would know his organization is transparent about its finances, subject to regular audits, and that most of its funding goes directly into conservation programs. Instead, he argues, she chose accusations over facts because conflict makes for a better segment. The tension hangs heavy until another co-host finally manages to interject, suggesting that while Joy may not have expressed it well, questions about the intersection of celebrity and activism are valid. Robert turns toward her, his tone softening slightly. He says he welcomes that conversation when it's conducted in good faith. What Joy has done, he explains, isn't asking questions, it's making accusations. She has implied his work is performative, that he exploits animals, and that he is trading on his father's name. Those aren't questions, he says. They are attacks based on assumptions rather than facts. Joy jumps back in, claiming that if he weren't so defensive, they could have a real conversation. Robert immediately corrects her, stating he isn't being defensive. He is defending his work, and there is a difference. When someone spreads false narratives, he says, you have every right to correct them. He tells her he is more than willing to have an honest conversation about the ethics of wildlife media. But it must be grounded in facts rather than vague feelings about exploitation without an understanding of the work being done. Joy leans forward again, her voice dripping with sarcasm, and tells him to educate her, asking how putting a crocodile on television qualifies as conservation. Robert pauses, takes a deep breath, and responds calmly. Putting a crocodile on television, he explains, isn't conservation by itself, it's education. Education leads to public support, which leads to funding, which leads to conservation. He explains that most people will never see a saltwater crocodile in the wild, or understand the critical role such animals play in their ecosystems. But when people see these creatures on television, learn how extraordinary they are, how long they've survived, and how human activity now threatens them, they begin to care. They donate. They vote for environmental protections. They pressure companies to stop destroying habitats. That, Robert says, is how real change happens. Joy cuts in once more, pointing out that he is still making money from it, and the tension in the room rises again as the confrontation shows no signs of ending. Joy continues to repeat her point like a broken record. But Robert counters immediately. Doctors make money from healing people. He says, should their motives be questioned too? Teachers earn salaries while educating children. Are they exploiting students? Firefighters get paid to save Libzar. They only in it for the paycheck. He explains that her entire argument collapses the moment it's applied to any other profession. Yes, he makes a living through conservation work, but that doesn't make the work less meaningful or the results any less real. Joy shakes her head and insists it's different, but Robert doesn't back down. It's exactly the same, he argues. She simply doesn't want to admit she came into the interview with a preconceived narrative and is now doubling down instead of acknowledging that she didn't have all the facts by. Now the tension in the studio is off the charts. The co-hosts look like they want to disappear under the table. The audience is split straight down the middle, and Joy and Robert are locked in an intense stare. Joy finally breaks the silence, her voice sharper than before. telling Robert he's taking everything too personally, and that this is just a conversation. Robert actually laughs, shaking his head in disbelief. A conversation, he repeats, pointing out that she's spent the last 15 minutes questioning his integrity, his family's legacy, and the legitimacy of his life's work. He tells her she doesn't get to throw grenades and then act. Surprised when someone responds with equal force, one of the co-hosts attempts to lighten the mood with a joke. But no one laughs. The room is too charged. Joy crosses her arms and says she's allowed to ask tough questions because that's her job. Robert agrees that tough questions are fair, but only when they are actually tough questions, not hostile interrogations. He explains that asking how filming is balanced with animal welfare would be reasonable. What she did instead was accuse him of exploitation without evidence, dismiss wildlife media as performative, and insult his father's memory. That, he says flatly, isn't journalism, it's being mean for ratings. Joy scoffs and tells him not to play the victim, reminding him that he came on the show knowing how it works. Robert corrects her immediately. He came on the show to talk about conservation and to discuss a major initiative capable of saving an entire ecosystem. Instead, she turned it into a character attack because controversy interested her more than environmental issues. He tells her that says far more about her priorities than his. Joy's face reddens as frustration builds, and she accuses Robert of twisting her words, claiming she never called him a bad person, only questioned his methods. Robert's response is ice cold. He reminds her that she compared his work to a circus, suggested he was living off his father's name, and implied everything he does is driven by profit and attention. Those aren't questions about methods. He says they're character assassinations. He makes it clear he isn't going to sit quietly while she rewrites the conversation now that it isn't going the way she planned. Another co-host jumps in desperately, urging everyone to agree that conservation matters, and asking Robert to explain the actual project he's working on. Robert takes a breath and visibly resets. He explains that his team is working to secure more than 50,000 acres of crocodile habitat in northern Australia land, threatened by development and climate change. Protecting it won't just save crocodiles. It will preserve entire ecosystems, including hundreds of species of birds, fish, plants, and other wildlife. It's a multi-million-dollar project that will take years, but the impact will be permanent. Joy immediately asks how it's funded, skepticism still laced in her voice. Robert meets her gaze and explains it's funded through a combination of government grants, private donations, and revenue from their media work and Australia Zoo. Without that so-called performative media, he adds, this project would not exist, and the animals she accuses him of exploiting would lose their habitat and disappear. He challenges her directly, asking what matters more, her philosophical objection to wildlife media or the actual survival of these species. Joy hesitates, clearly searching for a response that won't backfire, before saying she just believes there should be oversight. Robert responds instantly that there is oversight. They employ veterinarians, follow strict local and international regulations, and work alongside government agencies and independent conservation organizations. He explains that they are likely one of the most scrutinized wildlife operations in the world, precisely because they operate publicly. The transparency she's demanding already exists. She simply didn't bother to look. Joy fires back that maybe they should make it more obvious. Robert counters without hesitation, pointing out that this is national television with researchers, producers, and staff. The information is public and easily accessible. She didn't want information. He says she wanted controversy. And now she's upset because he's refusing to sit quietly and absorb it. The audience reacts loudly, applause and boos clashing across the studio. Another co-host attempts to lower the temperature, noting that emotions are clearly running high. Joy, however, doesn't step back. She tells Robert she appreciates his passion, but insists that not everyone has to celebrate his work uncritically, adding that some concerns are legitimate. Robert immediately pushes back, asking what those concerns are actually based on real examination of his work or a vague gut feeling. From his perspective, she hasn't offered a single concrete example of wrongdoing. Only broad accusations about wildlife media that she then applied to him personally. That, he says bluntly, isn't legitimate criticism, my lazy thinking. Joy's mouth drops open, shocked by the word lazy. Robert calmly clarifies that he's calling the argument lazy, not her. He even acknowledges her intelligence, which is exactly why he finds the situation so frustrating. Wildlife conservation is complex, he explains, and the ethics of media within it are equally nuanced. Reducing those complexities to a soundbite about exploitation and profit does a disservice to everyone. Genuinely trying to navigate those challenges responsibly, Joy snaps that she doesn't need to be lectured. Robert fires right back that he doesn't need to be slandered. They lock eyes as he finishes with a sharp final line: she started this, and the studio sits in stunned silence. Fully aware this interview has crossed the point of no return. You made the choice to come after me instead of having a genuine conversation about conservation, Robert says firmly. So don't act shocked that I'm defending myself. At that point, one of the co-hosts physically raises her hand between them, trying to stop the escalation and announcing they need to take a break. Joy objects immediately and insists they finish. She turns to Robert with a final question, asking whether he thinks he's above criticism. Robert meets her gaze calmly and says, not at all. He believes legitimate criticism is essential for growth. What she has offered today, however, is not criticism, but cynicism. He explains there's a difference between asking hard questions to understand and improve things, and asking hard questions simply to tear people down. He tells her she's made it very clear which camp she falls into. Joy tries to respond, but Robert continues. The sad part, he says, is that she could have used this platform to elevate a real conversation about conservation. She could have asked about challenges, innovative solutions, or how people at home could get involved. Instead, she chose to focus on his supposed moral failings because it's easier and more entertaining. He says flatly that it's not helpful, not productive, and beneath what the show should be. The studio falls into complete silence. Even Joy seems momentarily speechless as the co-hosts stare at Robert in disbelief. After a long pause, Joy clears her throat and tries to regain control. There's something different in her expression. Now maybe respect, maybe shock, but the smugness from earlier is gone. She remarks that Robert certainly knows how to make his point. Robert replies simply that he learned from the best, and the weight of his words lands immediately. He explains that his father taught him to fight for what he believes in, not to back down just because someone with a large platform tries to intimidate him, and never to let misinformation go unchallenged, because silence allows good work to be buried under bad narratives. Sensing an opportunity to shift the tone, one of the co-hosts leans in and asks Robert what he would say to young people who want to get involved in conservation but don't know where to start. Robert's entire demeanor changes. The tension drops, the anger fades, and the educator emerges. He tells them to start local, explaining that they don't need to travel across the world to make a difference. He encourages learning about threatened species nearby, volunteering at wildlife rescue centers, supporting organizations doing real work, and above all educating themselves. Understanding ecosystems and the interconnectedness of life, he says, makes people far more effective advocates for change. Joy jumps in again, suggesting that he would probably advise them to watch his shows and follow his social media. The jab is subtle but familiar, yet Robert doesn't take the bait. He calmly says that if people want to, That's fine, but there are hundreds of incredible conservationists doing amazing work around the world. And they should follow them too. He encourages reading scientific journals and watching documentaries from different organizations. The point, he explains, isn't to follow him specifically, but to engage with conservation in whatever way resonates. He is just one voice in a much larger movement. Joy clearly wasn't expecting that answer. She had hoped he'd promote himself so she could pounce, but instead he sidesteps the trap entirely. Another co-host smiles genuinely and praises Robert's work, sharing that her children grew up watching his programs and developed a passion for animals because of them. Robert thanks her warmly, saying that's exactly the goal: to inspire a generation that cares about the natural world, understands its interconnectedness, and is willing to protect it. If her kids care about animals, he says, then they've succeeded. Joy shifts in her seat, clearly trying to find a way to wrap things up without looking like she lost the exchange completely. She suggests they agree to disagree. Robert tilts his head slightly and gently challenges that. He says he doesn't think they actually disagree on the fundamentals. He believes Joy cares about animals and ethics, but they have very different ideas about what accountability looks like in practice. Maybe, he says, that disagreement is okay, and maybe the conversation itself has value. Even when it gets heated, it's a gracious exit, and Joy considers it before nodding. She thanks Robert for coming on and not sticking to standard talking points, admitting he's certainly kept things interesting. Robert replies with a small smile that it's one way to put it, drawing a ripple of laughter from the audience and finally easing the tension. A co-host wraps things up, thanking Robert and directing viewers to his conservation work and programs. Robert stands, shakes hands with the co-hosts, and even extends his hand to Joy. She accepts, and they exchange a brief, inaudible moment that seems to signal some understanding. As Robert walks off the set, the cameras catch the audience standing and applauding, voices calling out in support. The co-hosts turn back to the camera, trying to move on, but it's clear everyone is still processing what just happened. Joy looks thoughtful, perhaps, reconsidering a few things. What unfolded wasn't a typical talk show interview. It was a lesson in standing your ground, defending your work, and refusing to let hostility derail an important message. Robert Irwin came to talk about conservation, and even as the conversation turned into a confrontation, he never lost sight of what mattered: protecting wildlife and educating people about why that work is essential. Whether Joy raised valid concerns or crossed the line is something viewers will continue debating. And that might be a good thing, because regardless of where you land, the conversation brought attention to conservation, media ethics, and how vital work is funded today. One thing is undeniable: Robert Irwin proved he isn't just riding on his family name. He showed up prepared, defended his work with facts and passion, and made it clear he's deeply committed to the cause. Now the question is yours to answer. Was Joy right to push him, or did she go too far? Was Robert justified in pushing back so strongly, or could he have handled it differently? Share your thoughts, because this is a conversation worth continuing.